Hello and welcome. Bluepoint Leadership Development and BLR Learning are excited that you've joined us today for the last in our four-part webinar series on the leader as coach. Today is session number 4, the powerful coaching conversation. My name is Julie Henry, Director of Client Services with Bluepoint. Our guide today is Greg Thompson. Greg is a keynote speaker, author, and executive leadership coach with a passion for developing the greatness in individuals and organizations. As president of Bluepoint, Greg leads a talented group of professionals who design and deliver challenging educational experiences that accelerate the development of leaders. Greg is the author of several books, including The Master Coach. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Julie. And it is indeed an honor and a privilege to be here with you and to present the fourth in this series of webinars based on the Leader as Coach work that we do at Bluepoint. I am personally pleased, and I wanted to thank all of those of you who have sent the many emails talking about how this series has impacted you on a personal basis as a leader and as a coach. Thrilled to spend about the next 45-50 minutes with you talking about this idea of the coaching conversation. We have crafted a full agenda for you here today. We're going to start out looking at the 3C coaching model, which will essentially be a review of the overarching principles on which all of our coaching work at Bluepoint is based. We're going to look at the great coaching conversation itself and what is unique and special about it. I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about how that conversation impacts the role of what we call the coach-like leader. We're going to look at this idea of the question, the powerful question in coaching conversations, and then actually morph into a very similar piece about actually shaping the coaching conversation itself. I'm going to spend a bit of time looking at the more practical dimensions of the coaching conversations and we call that the coaching conversations at work. And then I'm going to wrap up with a few more personal comments on this whole idea of becoming the leader of the future today, and what does coaching have to do with that at the very essence of the role of the leader. You may recall, for those of you who have been with us through the course of this series, the 3C coaching model. And the 3C coaching model is not so much a series of practices or behaviors. It really looks at the 3 big dimensions that all of us who want to coach, all of us who want to lead differently, lead in a very much of a coach-like way, need to attend to. 3 dimensions: character, connection, and conversation. First of all, we looked at this whole idea of character. Who are we? What are our values? How do we show up to other people? Would people enter a coaching relationship with us willingly? One way to look at it is this whole idea of distrust and trust. When we distrust someone, and I don't mean that we think they are bad, oftentimes we simply don't know their intentions. All of us react very much in the same way. We're cautious, we're closed, we tend to be fairly private. When we really trust somebody, and mostly it's around their intentions, we really trust their intentions. We think that they are there for us in some way. What happens? We become more engaged, we become more open, we become more receptive. And so one of the things we all need to recognize and look at this as a career-long issue, a lifelong issue in many ways. Who we are as a person dictates who we are as a coach. And secondly is the idea of connection. It's the idea that a coaching relationship is special. What's special about it is that it's not a relationship of equals. It's a relationship that is all about the person being coached. It's their time in the sun. And our ability to create those connections rapidly often impacts our success as a coach. And then conversation, the actual coaching conversation. We believe that the coaching conversation is a craft. It's a craft that can be learned. It's a craft that can be mastered. But there also are some fundamental principles that we need to attend to if we're going to excel at this thing called a coaching conversation. So it's my hope that today I can shed some light on some of the aspects of the coaching conversation that you will find helpful in the dialogue, in the discourse that you have with others. I'd also like to remind you of the terminology we use in Bluepoint, because I'm going to be using some of that terminology today. If I refer to somebody as a coach or a leader coach, that's us. That's all of us who work inside organizations, and whether or not we are a formal leader or not, that's us who want to influence other people through coaching. If I refer and use the term talent, that's the person being coached. And so the English language really doesn't have a word for that internally within the organization. I'm an external coach. I'm an executive leadership coach. So I have clients. Some programs use the term coachee. That's kind of a made-up term and not one that I find particularly attractive. So we use the term talent. And largely because that's the direction we want the conversation to go in. We want to be talking about the other person as if they were a reservoir of talent. So just especially for you first-time participants, you'll hear me use the term coach or leaders coach and talent throughout the course of this call today. I wanted to share one model with you that we've looked at before because many of those of you who are line managers, supervisors, who run businesses, lead teams, find this particularly helpful. And it's called the coaching impact model. And what this model presents is what's called the leadership continuum. And if you look across the bottom of that model, there are 5 things that we do as leaders. We direct, we advise, we teach, we mentor, and we coach. And what determines whether or not we're directing, advising, teaching, mentoring, and coaching, all important aspects of leadership, is the agenda, whoever owns the agenda. So the agenda can be the project, the performance, the person's career, the problem, the opportunity, the challenge, whatever it is the agenda. So when the leader owns it entirely, they're directing. And as we move across and as we're able to make the shift to have the talent own the agenda, what happens is that's where we believe the lasting impact is. So as much as we can move up and down this continuum, the directing and advising is very attractive because it's expedient. We can do it very quickly. We know what we're doing in that area. We learn from all of our research and all the stories we hear from participants in our workshops that the real impact occurs at the right end of the continuum. The real impact occurs when we are being coached, when somebody sees the best in us, when somebody sees something in us we can't even see in ourselves, when somebody constructively confronts us, when somebody encourages us, affirms us, when somebody helps us gain a brand new perspective. This is where we have the greatest impact as leaders. So I'd like to talk a little just about this idea of the great coaching conversation and share a few thoughts some of them at a fairly practical level, others at a more ethereal, more a higher meta level. We believe at Bluepoint that most leadership happens one conversation at a time. Most leadership happens one conversation at a time. So when you think about your day, think about the number of conversations you have through the course of a day that are important conversations, 5, 10, 15, 20. So if we look at that, how often can we have a coach-like conversation? And what would make the conversation coach-like is that the other person leaves the conversation better in some way. They leave inspired. They leave maybe with some doubt. Maybe they leave with a question. They leave with a new perspective. Maybe they leave affirmed or acknowledged or appreciated in some way. So they leave that conversation better in some way. So a lot of the work we do around coaching is simply helping people to look at shifting the conversation, to have conversations that are distinguished by its originality. This is not a conversation they've ever had before. Candor, uncertainty, optimism, and courage. One of the reasons I want to share this slide with you is because this might be one of the most important slides in all the 4 presentations, and at least ranks up there in the top 2 or 3. It is this idea of the outcome of coaching. There's all kinds of things that come out of great coaching in terms of behaviors and shifts people make and being inspired to walk down new roads. All that happens. At the very core, though, good coaching produces 2 things: insight and action. Insight, it means that we change the way we think in some way, but it doesn't stop there. We're going to do something about it. And the reason I want to share these 2 words with you is for many master coaches, this is very thematic. They hold these as themes, and all the work that they do is trying to help people see their world, their possibilities through fresh eyes, make decisions to change, to become more functional in some way, and then actually do it. if you look also again back at this idea that leadership happens one conversation at a time, and we have throughout the course of the day all these many opportunities to have conversations, the coach-like leader is always looking for opportunities to make that shift, to shift the run-of-the-mill standard conversation into becoming a coaching conversation. I'll speak more about this in a little bit. So we look at this idea, the great conversation. What does it look like? It is very difficult to describe. I mean, there's some wonderful programs that talk about step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 of coaching. But I prefer really to look at a great coaching conversation in terms of the outcome, the output. So when you're having a conversation with people, do they leave the conversation more focused, more engaged, more committed, more energized? Do they feel appreciated? Do they feel constructively confronted in some way? Is there a sense of renewal coming out of that conversation? There's a term that is rarely used, and it's called equifinality. And what equifinality means is essentially all roads lead to Rome. And in coaching, not all roads actually lead to Rome, but there's many ways to get there. There's many ways to have a conversation in which a person feels appreciated. There's many ways to have a conversation in which people feel inspired. There's many ways to help people become focused on what's most important to them. Another big idea about the conversation and about people and about leadership is that we are all stuck. We are all stuck to some degree. And we almost have to be stuck because we performed at a lower level at a previous time. We had a more junior job. We've been promoted. We have bigger responsibilities. We have changed in many ways. We all have. And we put in place new habits, relationships, assumptions, priorities, beliefs, practices. We put all these in place to help us perform at this higher level. And in many cases, these are things that stop us from moving ahead. So when we look at a lot of coaching conversations, they're really not about fixing people and fixing their problems. The theme for most really good coaching conversations is helping good people, even good performers, even very high performers, getting unstuck so they can make a shift somewhere else, to a higher level of performance, to a different career, to be more functional in an area where they're not particularly functional in. All coaching conversations are a request for change in some way. It's a pursuit of change. It's the idea of looking for something different, a tomorrow that is better than today in some way. And it can be tough. I won't get into all the theories around change, but the one thing we do know is that there is a personal attachment to this idea of change. I'm often asked what's the difference between business coaching and leadership coaching and career coaching? And there's lots of differences. There's fundamental changes in objectives and the like. But the one thing that is similar and actually common in all change, in all coaching, and that's that emotions are always at play. Emotions are always at play. The reason being is whether you're coaching somebody on ordering office supplies or coaching somebody on corporate strategy, you're coaching somebody. And that person is a whole person. And they come into this coaching with all that they are, their values, their perceptions, their passions, their needs, their fears, they want. And the idea behind coaching is that the coach himself or herself is very much a purveyor of a better future. One of the differences between a counselor and a coach is a counselor often helps us sort out previous stuff, history stuff, so we can be better today. Coaches are always looking for tomorrow. Like, how can we make the tomorrow better than today? So we're not Pollyanna-like, but to be the master coach, to master the coaching conversation, we need to be able to come into these conversations and help the person we're coaching, help the talent, look at their future and find a pathway forward that is better tomorrow than today in some way. So what do we have? Now, there's a number of really good coaching programs that give us good guidance, and I'm going to share a process with you a little bit later that you might find helpful. But one of the things that distinguishes the coaching conversation than almost anything else we do is that all we have is now. All we have is the next moment ahead of us in the coaching conversation. We may have a journey that we're on. We may have a pathway we're trying to follow. But for us as the coach, All we can do is make this choice. What can I do in the next moment to best serve the talent? And it's my hope that through this discussion we're having today, this webinar today, I can help you fill your quiver with options, help you think through what are the kind of things that I might do in that conversation, in that moment, that would best help the person I'm coaching. Is it some feedback? Is it a question? Is it an affirmation? Is it a confrontation, a constructive confrontation? Do I need to tell them something that nobody else cares enough about them to share with them? Maybe there's an insight I could share with them. And I'll speak about this a little bit later as well. Maybe it's nothing at all. Maybe what the talent needs is an opportunity for reflection, for contemplation. Another big idea about coaching is that everybody has a story. And that story is the big conversation that's going on in their head. That conversation, that story is about who they are, what's possible, what are they good at, what are they not so good at, who likes them, who doesn't like them, how can they lead, how can they coach. So when we look at this idea of story, it is absolutely critical for the coach to understand what their role is. Our role as coaches is to help people create a new story. The neuroscientists tell us that the only way we store information in our brains is by sorting it into stories, into a whole variety of stories. And people will, the mind abhors a vacuum. People will make up stuff to fill up their story unless they are very conscious and deliberate about crafting their own story. When we are at our best in a coaching conversation, we are helping people articulate their story and challenge their story, challenge the assumptions on which it's based, and help them create a new, bigger story for themselves in some way. So let's talk a little bit about this thing called what we call like a coach-like leader. I think, and as I devoted a whole section of this webinar to here later on, I think that the leader of the future needs to be a coach, and it's not a passing competency. It is really the way that leaders today and in the future will really impact individuals and teams. Here, I have about half a dozen parameters and ideas that I think are particularly important for leaders when they look at how they position themselves as influencers, how they position themselves to lead, how they position themselves to serve, and mostly how they position themselves to be seen as what we call the coach-like leader. First and foremost, it's really being open to opportunities, seeking out opportunities to coach colleagues, team members, leaders, associates, customers. You can coach anybody. The theory behind great coaching is the receptionist can coach the CEO. We can coach our customers, the very best sales professionals these days, those ones that really take a consultative approach to it, an authentic approach to sales and business development. They are indeed coaches as well. It is about our perspective of the other person. We need to recognize that the person you are coaching is resourceful, uniquely talented, and fully capable of managing their own job and career. In other words, they don't need you to fix them. They don't need you to make their decisions. They don't even need you to solve their problems for them. And we, as I mentioned before, we keep one overriding thought in our mind at all times. Right now, what is the most potent thing I can do to be helpful to the other person? And if you know some coach-like leaders in your organization, they're like this. They're always just kind of on the edge. They're always stopping and thinking, okay, what can I do in this very moment to be helpful to the other person? As I said before, we don't need to fix the other person, solve their problems, make their decisions. We love to give advice. And as I mentioned before in previous webinars, giving advice is really low-grade help. Think about all the advice you get through the course of a day, how much of it really lands, how much of it really makes an impact on you. Now, many of us are advisors. We get paid to give advice, but the great coaches move beyond that. They move into helping people with questions. How are you going to apply that advice? What insights can you gain from this? How can you do it even better than the advice I would ever give you? And lastly, I'd mentioned before that coaching is a craft, and is a craft that can be learned, is a craft that can be mastered. And great coaches, they affirm, they challenge, they constructively confront, and they encourage others in conversation. They are skilled at this. They have practiced this. It becomes almost second nature to them. And lastly, it is really, the great coaches are always almost unsettled until somebody changes, until somebody commits doing something. They're always helping advance what we call advancing the action. They're always trying to advance people's learning, their commitment, and their actions. Okay, it's things like, okay, you've committed to doing this. Okay, what are you going to do about it? When are you going to do something about that? What's that going to look like? To whom are you going to hold yourself accountable? So this is the rhythm. These 6 points really are the rhythm, I believe, of the coach-like leader. I'm often asked, well, Greg, how do I find people to coach, and how do I really get in the game of coaching? And I think it's just all around us all the time. I think coaching opportunities appear to leaders every day, sometimes every hour. How we act in that moment determines everything. It determines whether or not we'll ever be invited back and welcome back into that coaching conversation or not. The thing about the coaching conversation is this, is that the other person needs to be a willing participant in the conversation. It's probably the only job in the world where we can be fired mid-sentence and never know about it. We didn't even know we got fired. We got fired mid-sentence, but we don't even know about it. So how we show up, our intention, determines everything. So I want to leave you with this sentence, this question from this section. When you look at this idea of being a coach like leaders, it requires a commitment, an investment. It's something that we need to determine to do differently every day. The cool thing about it is that this is not the purview. This is not the domain of a very few, very special leaders that are, some weird combination of Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, and Gandhi. Every one of us can be more coach-like and be seen as a coach-like leader in our organizations. So the question is very simple. What are we prepared to do to become that person? And again, the cool thing about it is tomorrow morning, every one of us can get up and be a coach-like leader. In our workshops at Bluepoint, we try to equip the participants with a variety of tools that they can use in their coaching so they can make that shift and move beyond just giving people advice and telling people what to do, and to be helpful in other ways. And one of the most potent of those is the question, the coaching question. And I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking to you about this idea of the coaching question and using the question in the coaching conversation. The coaching conversation awakens and stimulates inactive parts of our minds. It doesn't matter how experienced we are. It doesn't matter how old we are. It doesn't matter what our education is. It doesn't matter how smart we are. It doesn't matter how much IQ, EQ, whatever we have. The great coaching conversation helps us think differently. It awakens and stimulates inactive parts of our mind. And really the beauty of a great coaching conversation is this whole idea of renewal, refreshment, a recommitment. There's something about it that wakes up parts of us and helps us think differently, helps us learn from ourselves and learn from our own experiences, our own values, our own aspirations. We at Bluepoint provide our workshop participants with what we call the 60 big questions. These are questions that have really have stood the test of time, and many coaches and leaders find particularly effective in the conversations that they have with others in the organization. And there are questions like, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to ask yourself these questions as I go through them. When you are at your best, what are you doing? Now think about that. If you ask somebody that question, it assumes they have a best. It assumes they're responsible for the best. And as I mentioned before, all coaching is involved with emotion. It's pretty hard to think poorly of yourself when somebody's just asked you, when you're at your best, what are you doing? What did you do yesterday that is worth talking about today? This question is both affirming because it underlines the underlying principle here is that you can work at a level where you are doing work that is worth something, but it's also challenging. It challenges us to think about how are we constructing our work so that we're doing work that is worth talking about. This is a question that was asked of me about 3 years ago, and it still sits with me, but it made a huge impact on my personal work. I was working with one of our own coaches in Bluepoint, and he turned to me and says, Greg, is your best work ahead of you or behind you? Now, it's really interesting. One of the hallmarks of a great coaching question is that question has much more value to the talent than to the coach. My guess is he forgot about that question in 30 seconds, 2 minutes, 5 minutes later. That question has sat with me for 3 years and has fueled a lot of my work. Quite frankly, I still haven't answered the question, but it doesn't matter. It is the pursuit of the answer to that question that was such a gift to me. What's an entirely different way of looking at your situation? Helping people gain that new perspective. What would it take to shift your performance to a whole new level? This is a challenging, confronting question, but it's also a very affirming question. It says that you have potential. You have control of your own performance, your own life, your own work. So if you look at the idea of inspiration, you look at the idea of insight, you look at the idea of change, I really encourage you to have this thought in your mind as you're coaching. It may be one of the 60 big questions. It may not. It may be something else. But I really encourage you to be thinking about what question would really help this person think differently? What question would help this person see their world through fresh eyes? What question would challenge assumptions, challenge beliefs, and give this person the opportunity to access parts of themselves that have been, but have up to this point been dormant? Now, one of the things that we rarely talk about in coaching is silence, because most of us love to hear our own voice, love to talk, love to respond and say very intelligent, timely things and engage in that kind of a dialogue. Many times in coaching, we are at our best when we say nothing at all. Think about this. If we ask something very penetrating of the talent, and we do not give them any time at all to reflect and to contemplate on that, we are doing them a great disservice. The neuroscientists tell us it takes about 10 to 20 seconds to process a challenging question. And a challenging question is almost any kind of a coaching question. Is your best work ahead of you, behind you? What you really need to do to lift your performance to a new level? Are you really using all your talents? Are you doing the work you love? How can you do more of the work you love? These kinds of questions take time. But most of us have trouble with the silence. Think about this next time you're in an elevator, next time you talk to a perfect stranger about the weather. You don't care about the weather, they don't care about the weather. We cannot stand the intimacy of the silence. You can tell when you're in the presence of a master coach is that they have the discipline to invite and welcome silence into the coaching conversation. So let's shift to module number 5, which I've entitled as Shaping the Coaching Conversation. I think this is probably one of the most important roles in the conversation for us as coaches, is actually shaping the coaching conversation. Generally speaking, in the coaching conversation, you look at who is responsibility for what. The talent owns the agenda. And you are at your best as a coach when you insist that the talent owns the agenda. The agenda is the challenge, the opportunity. What's the most important thing on your mind? What do you want changed? What do you want to achieve? What do you want to do? So that the talent owns the agenda. However, the coach owns the process. Now, these get a little blurry from time to time because sometimes you're working with a talent and they will really want to walk down a particular pathway. But what I wanted to do was to share with you what we call the coaching pathways at Bluepoint. What these are is potential ways that you might, as a coach, take the conversation. And they're not linear, and they all don't lead to a pot of gold. So you might be working with a talent and go down a particular pathway, and it is not particularly fruitful. And then you might go down another pathway, you might choose, and that is quite fruitful, but you want to continue. And you go down another pathway, and that's fruitful as well. You might go down another pathway from that point, and that's not so fruitful. And then you come to a point where there's a major aha, there's an insight, and the talent gains that insight and wants to take some action from that. This is how we use the pathways. And the purpose of me introducing these here to you today is to hopefully give you some tools that you can use in actually shaping the coaching conversation so that it is most beneficial to the talent. Here's something I'm going to introduce what we call in Bluepoint the 12 coaching pathways. Maybe the talent is just feeling really stuck, and they're selling themselves short. They're kind of bored in their work. Maybe what the pathway is envisioning a bigger goal, life or legacy. Maybe there's a lot of dissonance in their lives. They simply don't have peace in almost anything. And so maybe it is aligning their behavior and energy with their values. Maybe their values are way, way, way out on the left, and maybe their behaviors are way, way out on the right. And maybe through the coaching process, we can help bring those together. Maybe you hear them selling themselves short, overly dismissive of their own skills and such. Oftentimes that's not humility. Oftentimes that is a fear of stepping out, and they continue to sell themselves short. So they don't have to use all the talents that they have been given. Maybe they spend a lot of their time just blaming other people for everything that happens to them at work and in life and such, and maybe they need to be challenged to hold themselves accountable. Maybe that's a good pathway. Maybe they're avoiding taking some action. Your senses, your instincts are, your intuition is that they need to be challenged to do the kind of things that they know they need to do. Most of us have talents that we haven't used yet. We haven't developed. It's almost always a good source of, a rich source of a beneficial conversation in coaching. Many of us have a story that simply is not true. Many of us have a story that we know is not true, and we simply haven't faced up to the reality of the circumstance. One of the defining features of a great coaching conversation is the raw truthfulness that is associated with that. Gaining fresh perspectives, helping them see their own world through fresh eyes, choosing optimism, confidence, and happiness. We at Bluepoint believe that this is a choice. It's a choice we can make every day. Now, it doesn't mean we don't see the challenges, the difficulties, the brambles and the thorns ahead of us, but we choose to take an optimistic, confident, and happiness approach to our work. Now, we as coaches may want to help our talent, the person we're coaching, walk down that road as well. Moving past past mistakes and failures, things that are holding us back. If there's a lot of discord in one's life, maybe it comes from the fact that the work and work life and the personal life and the family life, the community life are not integrated in any real way. Maybe we need to help the person clarify boundaries. Maybe they're taking responsibility for one of their team members where that's very unhealthy in some ways. Maybe they need to recognize that they are responsible for providing great leadership to their team members, but maybe they're not responsible for their careers, their financial security, their future with the organization. All they can do maybe is the very best they can do as leaders. So here are what we call the 12 coaching pathways. Just as I have that slide up on the screen, I'm going to invite you to do one thing. I'm going to invite you just to look at those very, very quickly and pick a number. Pick a number that if you were being coached, which one of these might be a particularly fertile pathway to walk down as with your coach? Which one of these might be particularly fertile for you at this point? Just write that number down. And I'd like you to, if you would please, just write the actual pathway down. Do you find yourself selling yourself short? Are there some places where you need to really face up to reality? You need to start aligning your behavior and energy with values. Do you feel you're really not in the flow? Oftentimes when we feel we're not in the flow, it's because what we're doing really doesn't align with our values. Is there something bigger that you really need to be doing in your work, in your life? Maybe you need to envision that. Is there something you need to move past? Have you had, like all of us, had mistakes and failures in the past? Do you need to move past that? Now, as we look at these, one of the reasons I wanted you to do that is that as we become better at recognizing these in ourselves, we become better at recognizing these in others, and we can be of more service to those that we coach. So I'd like to shift now the conversation to what we call the coaching conversation at work, and maybe look at a few more practical aspects of being a leader and being a leader coach. If we look at, again, the number of conversations that we have as a leader and as a coach, I think that we need to always have this in our mind. How can we make these conversations really matter? A lot of our conversations are self-oriented. I want to meet you. I want to give you instructions. I want to learn from you. I want to be entertained by you. I want to form a relationship with you. I want. We go through the course of a day with a lot of these I want conversations. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. We all need to have a healthy degree of self-interest, and that comes through in these I want conversations. However, is it really to be a coach-like leader? We need to start making that shift so that our conversations matter not just to us, but they matter to other people. So just to start this conversation off, this module off, I would encourage you to think about the kind of conversations that you have through the course of a day, through the course of a week, through the course of a month. Interpersonal conflicts, kicking off critical assignments, disappointing performance, launching new projects, seeing the untapped talent around you, unseen business opportunities, new partnerships. Maybe there's new team members that are coming on. Career counseling. There is literally dozens and dozens of kinds of conversations that we have an opportunity to come into contact with every day. How can we approach those conversations? Now, as much as I believe that we need to be ready in the now to do whatever we need to do as coaches to say the most important thing to the talent, and it's also as much as I believe that we need to use all of our intuition and all of our instincts to come into that conversation and to do what is the very best for the individual, the person that we're coaching. We also believe that for many of us, myself included, I like to have a rhythm laid out. I like to have a plan that at least I can think about following. Now, we call this the 5 core coaching practices at work. These are very powerful ways of approaching coaching, but I would like to give you a caveat right up front. Rarely does anybody follow these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oftentimes it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, back to 2. These are really meant to help us move from opening a conversation to somebody taking some action. And we use these in one of our programs. We call it the Powerful Coaching Conversation, where we provide leaders, often early stage leaders, first level supervisors, with the tools and skills to actually initiate, conduct, and close a coaching conversation. But I must tell you is that these 5 practices, the practices I'm going to introduce to you now, are practices that we all can use. They are, number 1, affirm the person, confront the facts, explore the possibilities, encourage the change, and advance the action. So affirming the person, it's really about not doing a gap analysis. And a gap analysis is this. You start the conversation with an idea of what is good and what the person is doing right now, and looking at what they need to do to move from where they are to what is good. It's really about recognizing the person's gifts, recognizing the person's opportunities, their potential, their talents. Think about this from a personal perspective. When you enter a conversation with somebody, if you feel judged and criticized from the step 1, are you likely to engage in a coaching conversation with that person? Probably not. Number 2, and as I mentioned before, what you want to do in a coaching conversation is do as much as you can to find what is true, confronting the facts, diving deep into assumptions and beliefs to make sure that the talent is making a decision about their future based on the truth, not based on myth, not based on mistruths. Thirdly, so that exploring possibilities. Coaches are not teachers. Leaders need to be good teachers, but coaches are fellow learners, are co-learners. The best coaches explore territory that has never been explored before. They learn with the talent. Secondly, it's about encouraging the change. As I mentioned earlier, change can be very difficult. It's letting go of what we have today, and many times letting go of a trapeze that we're hanging on to pretty tightly to grab one that is still swinging. So there's this element of encouraging people to choose a pathway that is very best for them. And as I mentioned before, it's about advancing the action. Until something changes, coaching is just talk. The very best coaches are in some ways a professional nag. We often are that link between intention and action. And so whatever you do in coaching, the great coaches always try to end any conversation with a commitment from the other person as to what they're going to do, and particularly what are they going to do that is different. At the end of any conversation, we have the opportunity to think about were we at our very best? Could we have done something different? A master coach is always thinking about how they can enhance their competency as a coach, fill their toolkit with new tools, how they can be bigger, different, better, more of a catalyst for change in their conversations. And the one barometer that many use is this: they walk away empty. When you can walk away from a conversation and saying, I did my very best, I did everything I could, not to advance my agenda, but to help advance the other person's agenda, to be that catalyst for change. When you can walk away empty, my guess is you're functioning at that level of a master coach. So, on a practical sense, how can you initiate a coaching conversation? Well, the very, very best, in my view, is, and as you become better as a coach, as you become able to master the art of coaching, you'll get more invitations. You'll get people coming to say, I'd really like to get your perspective on this. That is a wonderful way to enter into a coaching conversation. Sometimes it's about you making a request, you suggesting it. Maybe you've been asked for advice. I've given you my thoughts. Let's talk about your best path forward. It's about really helping, it's about making that shift even mid-conversation from an advice giving into a coaching conversation. Maybe you've had to give the person some tough news. The real agile, effective leaders these days are able to pivot. They're able to provide somebody some real tough feedback. And in the very next moment, pivot and extend the hand, that offer of coaching. Maybe you just see somebody in the organization that you just absolutely are convinced that there's unrealized potential there. And you approach them and you say, listen, I just see so much in you that you're not using. I just see such a bright future for you. I'd love to explore these options with you. Oftentimes when we look at coaching, we look at it as a formal process. And it can be a very formal process. I work on routine basis with my clients. I tend to speak with them about once a week. We work together over about a 6-month period, and it's a pretty intense experience for them. Your world as an organizational leader, I would suggest you look at coaching through 3 lenses, through these 3 modes of coaching. Number 1, I would encourage you to always have a formal, ongoing coaching relationship at any one time. Find somebody that you can work with on a weekly basis, a bi-weekly basis, and simply continue that conversation over a period of 2, 3, 4, or 5 months. It'll be great for them. You'll see them grow in so many ways, and it'll also be wonderful for you. It'll give you an opportunity to really lift your ability to coach. Secondly, the second mode is just being aware of how you can coach in the moment. A brief conversation after a meeting, a hallway conversation, just dropping into somebody's office and asking them a question or sharing a perspective with them, to being aware that you can make a huge impact even just in the moment. And the last one is having a universal coach-like approach to all of your work. If you reflect back on that coaching impact diagram, you know, the one that had the agenda on the left-hand axis, and as the agenda was assumed by the talent, we became much more coach-like in our leadership. It's making a commitment. Being a universal, having a universal coach-like approach is making a commitment to drive always to the right end of that continuum. Try to moving away from directing and advising and moving towards being much more coach-like in all that you do. We talk often in organizations these days also about a coaching culture. And while these next comments are really dedicated to everybody on and directed at everybody on this call, those of you who are senior leaders, I would challenge you to be thinking about the idea of coaching and what a coaching culture means. Generally speaking, when you have a coaching culture, you have a high performance organization. You have an organization that has a deep culture and almost ethos of accountability. You have a culture where well-intentioned feedback flows freely through the organization. Careers rapidly develop, and there's really a sense of personal and organizational learning. This is often what we call a coaching culture. Now, I've addressed this in much more detail in other webinars, but I did, because we're talking about coaching at work, I did want to introduce it here. I wanted you to be thinking about, okay, what do you need to do to advance this thing called a coaching culture? This is a definition, first of all, of culture that I particularly like. It's simple, but it's very pointed. Culture is how we think, act, and interact. How we think, act, and interact. And therefore, when you look at this, what does that mean for us as leaders? Well, many organizations, they set out to create a culture. They develop training programs, they put vision statements on the wall, they realign their performance management systems and the like, oftentimes to no avail. And the reason being is they do not recognize that culture is downstream from leadership. Culture is downstream from leadership. So what this means for us as senior leaders, anybody who sits closer to the top of the house than the bottom of the house, is that if we want to establish this thing we call a coaching culture, we need to function differently. We need to function differently. We need to function as coaches. We need to appreciate coaches. We need to hire coaches. We need to equip our organization with coaching competencies and skills. What we do with regard to coaching will have a direct impact as to whether or not we have a culture of coaching or not. Seventh module, becoming the leader of the future today. I really couldn't conclude this series of webinars about coaching if I didn't talk about what this means for us, any one of us, who is a leader in the future. I believe that to become the leader of the future today, one must become a great coach and must make coaching a habit. It really, in many ways, is not a leadership competency. It is your leadership. My guess is most on this call will be leading in the future, and a huge piece of your function will be coaching other people, and it will make or break your leadership, whether or not you are a great coach and whether or not you're able to make great coaching a habit. So when you look at the conversation, it's the idea of being committed to deepening the conversation, being able to have conversations that go deeper than regular conversations and amplify our conversations. And we do that. We amplify our coaching by learning the tools, by learning how to ask questions, by learning how to shape the conversation itself, how to help the talent choose and go down pathways that are rich with possibilities, rich with affirmation, rich with challenges. And here's the one that I, again, could not leave this conversation without emphasizing, because coaching is a craft. There's many tools and skills and processes and systems that we can use. The however is this: coaching is a person-to-person process. And there's many skills and processes to learn in coaching. However, it's our humanity that allows us to become a master coach. It's our humanity that allows us to become a master coach. And that doesn't just mean about caring about people. It really means about bringing all that we are into the coaching conversation, into the coaching relationship. We use an indicator to help people identify what they're really good at as a coach. So I would encourage you now to look down that left-hand column and look at all the natural strengths. My guess is you have all of this. My guess is also like 2 or 3 of these would probably stand out for you. Maybe you're particularly expressive. Maybe you have good judgment. Maybe you're futuristic in some way. Maybe you're resourceful. Maybe you're particularly curious. Maybe you have strong intuition. It's really about bringing all that you are into the coaching conversation. So what does this mean? Well, there's one word that I like to use. It's not a word that's used frequently these days, but it is the word that I think really captures all that we are and putting it in action for the other person, for the talent. It's about bringing this idea of discernment into the coaching conversation. One definition of it: a keen perception and acuteness of judgment. And so it's not just sitting back and simply asking questions. It's about asking questions that are based on everything we know, everything we think, and everything that we are, because those are the questions that are most helpful to the other person. I also couldn't leave this conversation without sharing one other thought with you, and that's a question for you. Please be thinking about this. What 5-letter word is the anathema of coaching, the enemy of coaching? And it really is the word should. It is really the word should. Now, the word itself is not bad, but when you think about it, think about how many people that when you go see them, they're going to tell you what you should do. We tend not to ascribe the qualities of coach to that person. We tend to move away from that person. Rarely does a master coach ever use the word should, what you should do, what you should not do. Really, that's not our role. I would really, though, challenge you to tune your ears to that. Listen, how often do you use that word in the course of a day? Are you a should leader? Are you really just walking around telling people what they should do? My guess also is you know some people who are should leaders. They're people that every time you walk in their office, every conversation that comes up, they're the first one in line to tell you what you should do. My guess is that you do not ascribe the qualities of coach to that person. I would encourage you to step away from that, to start looking at how you can grow personally. Encourage self-assessment in you. What's working? What's not working? What do you need to change? And be bold in your coaching. Every one of us can be a great coach. There's nothing stopping any of us. It is one of the ubiquitous, universal roles in life. Every one of us can do it if we choose to dive in and to be the coach. The question also sits with us. How will you seek out additional opportunities to coach those around you? I will promise you this. Every one of us can look for those opportunities tomorrow, and we can find those. It has really been a delight to speak to you and to share this time with you. I have just a few final comments I wanted to share with you. One is, as you look at the road ahead, you are where you are today. And my hope is that through these 4 webinars that you have been encouraged to make a shift in that road, that you have been able to look at your role as a leader, your role as a consultant, your role as a human resource professional, your role as a individual contributor, and look at how you can make a shift by having conversations that are different, having conversations that are more coach-like, establishing relationships that are different, that are more coach-like. I love this quote from Maria Robinson. Nobody can go back and start a new beginning, but anyone can start today and make a new ending. That's what coaches are in the business of. We're in the business of helping people today start and create new endings. If you dreamed bigger, what would that look like? If you dream bigger, what would that look like? And so while we ask this question of those that we coach, I ask this question of you. What would it look like as a leader to know that you are really impacting the lives and careers of twice, 3 times, 10 times as many people around you? My guess is most of us want to be important in the lives of others. And essentially, that's what coaching is. I shared this slide with you in the last webinar, and it is one of those slides that I think we need to be reminded of all of the time. Coaching is not about fixing other people. Coaching is not even about helping people solve their problems in life. Coaching is not we're not confidants, and we're not scratching posts for all the complaints of the organization. We are catalysts for change. And to be the catalyst for change, it is an expression of faith in the other person. It means I see a bigger you. It means I can see a bigger, better future for you. Let's look at how we can collectively, together, in partnership, chart a path to that future. This, I promise you, is my last slide. And I did want to share with you why I do this work, and I wanted to share with you a thought that you might take away as a coach. I do this work not for you. So even though I have not met you, we are doing this program virtually. I have a vision, I have a story about who you are, and I have great affection for every person that took the time to join this webinar. But I do this work for every person you're going to touch tomorrow, next week, next year. And if you think about your role as a coach, how important it can be to help other people grow because of the other people that they will help grow. So I would really encourage you to think about this idea of coaching as a very noble calling. I also like this image because it brings out what I consider to be the essence of coaching, and in many ways the essence of parenting as well. We as coaches, and I believe we as parents, our number one role is to find the fire that burns inside other people, find the passion that burns inside them, and throw gasoline on it. It is the idea that coaching is not about incremental change. Coaching is not about minor tune-ups. Coaching is really about helping people be all that they can be in a practical conversation, in a conversation that really helps them see themselves in a whole new way. It is a career-long journey, and I'm hopeful that these 4 sessions has helped you accelerate that journey. Before I turn it back over to Julie, I just want to again, thank all of you who have reached out and have contacted me and sent me both questions and wonderful words via email. I'd be delighted to continue to hear those. If there's something that I can do for you personally, please give me a call. I'll try to do that. If there is a resource that you need, or any kind of a process or information or knowledge or resource that will help you accelerate this journey, please let me know.
Thank you so much, Greg. Thank you for your time and your expertise. This has been really powerful. And thank you to everyone else for joining us. We hope this webinar series has been helpful as you look to develop your own coaching skills and/or build a coaching culture at your organization. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day.